Hi you guys, my name is Steven. I'd like to welcome you back to my calibration channel. I'd also like to welcome back Maddie and Carl, my two Monte Carlo experts. Today let's use a modern data integrity perspective to look at how we're going to benefit from using Monte Carlo simulation to enhance and strengthen our current process and asset knowledge. Then we're going to see how easy it is to get started by walking through a real example right in Excel. Now here's my agenda for this pair of videos that I'm going to do about Monte Carlo. In this video, I'm going to start by taking 4 minutes to discuss some huge constraints that are throttling our current data analysis environment. Next, I'll introduce a typical problem that would be greatly assisted using Monte Carlo because it's blocked by these constraints. Lastly, I promise to provide a backup resource which has a ton of details about my solution to this particular problem. In the second video, if you care to stick around, I will go through an exact column-by-column explanation of my Excel solution to this example. This will only be my current best shot at a solution, not the solution, because that depends on everybody's particular circumstances. So what are the data constraints that I'm talking about? 1. We almost never have enough clean, single-source, homogeneous data to provide as much confidence as we would prefer, nor the confidence that our bosses are increasingly demanding from us. 2. If we try to recruit new data sources to increase our confidence, that just means that we're importing new problems that we may not even have the resources to solve. That's because each additional data source that we add carries its own unique history, hidden biases, and hidden cleaning issues. 3. New data sources are really hard to locate because there's some very, very smart people that might have been working in this same area, sometimes for decades. That means there's just no low-hanging fruit left anywhere in this neighborhood. 4. More and more people are willing to agree that data is a corporate asset, just like any other capital asset. But data needs maintenance just like other assets. In the case of data, that's because data integrity always degrades over time if we don't maintain it. However, as asset professionals, we know very well that upper management is quite capable of cutting all data maintenance dollars right out of our budget. Just ask any reliability person. And lastly, any industry practice includes some older rules of thumb about how to manage process control or product quality. The ancestry of these rules is by definition cloudy at best, even though when we say them out loud to ourselves, they sound very sensible and true even to this day. But data gathered in the vicinity of these practices must be suspect as a result of this cloudiness. The constraints that I'm talking about block all innovation. This is exactly how status becomes quo. Any one of these general constraints is by itself a great reason for us to consider strengthening our current data process and asset understanding by generating Monte Carlo simulation data for ourselves. In contrast to these barriers, we can create Monte Carlo data exactly as we want it, exactly when we want it, and bypass every single one of these constraints. We don't need to ditch anything that we've accumulated over time, so there's nothing to lose. On top of that, Monte Carlo automatically generates its own validation data set. What more could QA or the FDA ask of us? Okay, let's tackle a problem that suffers from several of these constraints that I've just summarized. Please stick with us because as we walk through this simple illustration, you may very well see an improvement path for a completely different problem that you know of in one of your settings, but it's a setting that also suffers from these constraints. Now, as I've said, rules of thumb are suspect because they may conceal a surprisingly weak validation history. Let's take a look at one rule of thumb that also happens to support almost all traceable measurement practice in any field. Now, it's a very general rule of thumb that anytime we make an important measurement, we must back up that measurement data by applying a measurement standard in calibration of our measurement data source that's at least 4 times better than the target, whatever we mean by that. Now, where is the proof that 4 to 1 is actually better than, say, 3 to 1, or worse than 5 to 1? How can we validate or strengthen this vague rule? How can we migrate past this rule of thumb level and move towards something that's transforming it into something that looks a lot more like a law? Clearly, we don't need to look at a traditional approach, because if this was the answer, someone would have already figured it out 75 years ago at the end of World War II. Traditional data approaches suffer from the constraints that I've listed above, or else there would already be a bulletproof solution to this particular question. Now, the reason I'm so sure of this is because this whole question of 4 to 1 is absolutely critical to global product quality decisions that span all the way from pharma manufacturing to Toyotas. Now, here's how we can make some significant progress on this very tough problem using Monte Carlo Simulation right in Excel. Now, first, using a Monte Carlo protocol, it's very simple and quick to model a variety of scenarios with different relationships between our standard, our equipment, and our results. At the high end, let's start by modeling a standard that we say is 10 times better than the thing that it measures. But instead of just saying it's 10 times better, let's say instead that it exhibits 10 times less variation and therefore displays 10 times less uncertainty than our target. That will greatly improve the focus of our problem statement. Next, we intentionally introduce a potential disaster for our company by generating a circumstance in which sometime later our calibration lab gives us the very bad and very late news that the standard itself was found subsequently to be out of tolerance during its own calibration. Now, I use the word disaster carefully and deliberately because potentially we might have to re-execute every single calibration performed with our out-of-tolerance standard. We might have measured product that already shipped before we had the first hint that there was a problem with the standard that produced that product. Alternately, we might also be able to prove to ourselves that the variation in this standard was so small that it was invisible to the question of the calibrations performed using the 10 to 1 standard, and that we are quite safe in saying that our company, our customers, and our products have suffered no harm whatsoever. The second that we define the decision rule in Excel, Monte Carlo shows us the consequence of that decision when the standard is 10 to 1. It does that for us by calculating the number of recalibrations that are required in this 10 to 1 scenario according to the decision rule that we just stuck in Excel. It's these recalibrations that represent such a huge risk to our company. We repeat this scenario, except in the next case, our standard is only 9 to 1 compared to its target. We repeat this all the way down to the logical limit, which is one in which the standard's variation is identical to the equipment's variation. That's what we call a 1 to 1 calibration ratio. Now, here is the exact reason for using Monte Carlo. When we compare the number of required recalibrations that are the result of each of these scenarios, that lets us compare the relative safety and assurance provided by each of these calibration ratios. Because of the constraints that apply here, there's no other possible or practical path to even seeing, much less comparing, these ratios in any real-world calibration data set. It's just never going to appear for us that way. Now, I picked this particular problem because I wrote a memo on it in April of 2006. In that memo, I included a complete description of my support and my spreadsheets in Excel. I have posted a scan of this memo right on my website, stephenpurrier.com. If you have any curiosity, go to stephenpurrier.com and then click on the Research tab, and there you will find my entire defense for my position in these two videos. If you care to stick around for the second short video, I'll take you through my Excel spreadsheet column by column. Also, I'll show you the equations I used to derive the data I placed in each column. Please feel free to improve on them once you see the way I did it, because I know damn well it could be done better than I did. In the meantime, I want to thank you very much for your attention. See you around.